So the data hiding principle says that a class should hide its internal data from the outside code and provide functions for accessing the data. We did the first step by making these member variables private, but now we need to provide functions for accessing these member variables. For each variable, we need two functions, one to get the value, the other to set the value. So here I'm going to declare two functions, int getWidth and void setWidth that takes a width. Now we refer to the first function as a getter, also called an accessor, and the second function as a setter, also called mutator. To mutate something means to change it. So with this function, we can set or change the value of width, okay? So here we have two function declarations. Now, to speed things up, I'm going to put the cursor here and generate the definition for this function. Now, if you're not using CLion, you have to type this out yourself, okay? So here we're going to return the width member variable. Good. Now, back to our class. Let's generate the definition for the second function. Okay. Now, in this function, we have a chance to validate the width. So if the width is less than 0, we can report an error. So we can say if width is less than 0. Now here we're going to throw an exception. An exception is a way to report errors in our programs. We're going to talk about them in detail later in the course. So for now, just follow along with me. Type exactly what I'm going to show you. So we type throw invalid argument followed by parentheses, and here we type the name of the invalid argument, that is width. So invalid argument is a class. It's a kind of exception for reporting invalid arguments, okay? So if the width is invalid, we throw an exception. Otherwise, we set the width member variable to the width parameter. But look, this line is ambiguous because it's not clear what we have on the right or the left side of the assignment operator. Now here we have two solutions. Some people prefer to prefix the member variables of their classes with m underline. That is a common convention. A lot of C++ applications and frameworks are built this way. Another convention is to stick with proper names and rename this parameter from width to, let's say, the width. So using either of these conventions, we can differentiate between these two variables. But I personally don't like either of these approaches, so I'm going to show you a third way. The third way is to use what we call the this pointer. This is a pointer to the current object. We talked about pointers in the previous part of this course. So to refresh your memory, a pointer is a special variable that holds the memory address of another variable. So this is a pointer, which means it holds a memory address. So now to access the actual object or the current rectangle object, first we need to dereference this, then we wrap it in parentheses, and now using the dot operator, we can access the width member, and then we can set it to the width parameter. Now there is a better way to write this code. Instead of dereferencing this pointer, wrapping it in parentheses, and then using the dot operator, we can type this followed by an arrow. This is a shortcut, okay? Now in CLion, if we type this followed by a period and then select width, CLion automatically converts our period to an arrow, okay? So I'm going to go with this notation. That is just my personal preference. But again, you see a lot of people use the m underline prefix. So we're done with this setter. Now let's test it. So back to our main file. Obviously, we cannot access the width attribute anymore. So to set the width, we have to call setWidth, and here we pass -1. Now look what happens when we run the program. So our program terminated with an uncaught exception. So we did not allow our rectangle object to go to an invalid state. This is the benefit of defining getters and setters. Now let's create a getter and a setter for the height attribute. But this time we're going to use a shortcut. So I'm going to put the cursor on the height. Now let's right click and select the generate command. So the shortcut on Mac is Command and N. On Windows, it's probably Control and N. Now here we can generate various kinds of constructs. We can generate a getter, a setter, or both a getter and a setter. If we only generate a getter, this attribute essentially becomes read-only. We can only get it, we cannot set it. But in this case, we want to generate both a getter and a setter. Now on this dialog box, we have to confirm our attribute. And by the way, attributes are also called fields. So on the top, we have select fields to generate getters and setters. So field means attribute or property or member variable. Different people call it different things. So let's go ahead. All right. So now we have a getter. In this getter, we have the constant keyword. We'll talk about that later in the section, so don't worry about it now. But look at the implementation of the setter. So over here, instead of the this pointer, we have rectangle followed by double colons. This is another way to set the height attribute of the current object. But for consistency, I'm going to change this to this followed by an arrow. Okay. Now we should also do our validation. So if height is less than 0, then we're going to throw invalid argument and pass height. Now, as your exercise, I want you to create a class called textbox. In this class, we have an attribute called value of type string. Now, this hyphen you see here means that this is a private member. Now, in this class, we have two public functions, getValue and setValue. Now, these plus signs here means these functions should be declared as public. So spend a couple of minutes on this, then come back see my solution. All right, so here in our project, we're going to add a new C++ class called textbox. Now, in our class declaration, first we should list the public members. So here we have two functions, string getValue and void setValue that takes a string. Now, because we're using the string class, we need to include its header file on the top and use the std namespace. Now, whenever we have a string parameter, it's always best to declare it as a reference parameter so the values are not copied across function calls. This is for performance reasons. Now, also, it's better to declare this parameter as a constant. So in this function, we don't accidentally modify the original string passed here. Okay. So here are our public members. Now let's declare our private members. We only need a single member here, which is string value. Now let's generate the definition for these functions. Here we're going to return the value. Pretty easy. And one more time, let's generate another function definition. Now I prefer to put the ampersand right after the type. It's just my personal preference. Now here we're going to set this.value to value. Now let's go to our main file and use our textbox class. So first on the top, we're going to include the textbox header file. Next, we create a textbox object. Here we call the setValue function or method. We pass a string like hello world, and then we call box.getValue to print the value. Take a look. There you go. Beautiful.